Geekly! This week on Geekly, we are going to talk about The Last of Us premiere. We're going to talk about the NFL playoffs, and I will talk about Ultra, the podcast. And now your host, Mike and Deglio.
Hey team, what is up? Welcome to K&M Geekly. Just a sneak peek at three geeks talking about some of the things that got them through their week. And we are starting, Keith, like the good old days of just everything not working, which is one of our favorite things. And we are extra specially excited to welcome back to the podcast my brother, Nick Indeglio, Dr. Nick Indeglio. It's Martin Luther King Day, so you have the day off, everybody, and we are here talking geek stuff. And we have brought in the heavy guns because last night was the premiere of one of my most anticipated new television series and HBO's next big thing, maybe? And that's The Last of Us, based on the popular Sony PlayStation video game by Naughty Dog Entertainment and Neil Druckmann. The Last of Us. I've been excited about it way back since I played the first game and forced my brother to play the games. Next, we'll be forcing Keith to play the games, but we need Keith's unsullied opinion because he has not played the games.
I have not played the game.
But let's start how we always start. Keith, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. It's a beautiful Monday morning here in New Jersey. Trying to hold Mike back from dropping 9 hours of content every week. But we're having a good time. Mike's like, can we drop 6 things all at once? Can we drop something every hour? I'm like, Mike, I don't even want to hear 7 hours of content a week from us.
But I think that's you selling that, Keith. That's just because you hate us. But everybody else, Keith, loves us.
I don't hate us. I love us in moderation.
It's like cake.
It's like cake. Well, I actually do. I love cake in no moderation. But imagine something else.
Okay, Nick.
Orange juice.
Orange juice. Yeah, exactly. It's delicious in moderation.
Yeah, can't have too much.
Yeah.
Nick, we're going to ask you to do us a huge solid here. And with no preparation or rehearsal, I want you to thank for us the patrons of our podcast.
I would love to thank the patrons of the podcast, and these are people who deserve as much credit as humanly possible for supporting Keith and Mike Entertainment. We've got Brian Kaufman, just such a great person and excellent business person as well. Casey Clark, Cloudlover69, which sounds like a pornographic username of some sort. However, I'm going to assume it's not. Yeah, maybe it's not. Who knows? I've definitely never seen them on Pornhub. Jason Moe, also an excellent person. Glad to have them supporting the podcast. Andrew Hayes, Jorge Navoa, probably mispronounced his name, and I do apologize for that. Anne the Mysterious. I do remember a little bit about Anne from the last time I was on the show. Seems like a very mysterious person indeed. My favorite patron, Worf's Boot Shivs. I didn't know what a boot shiv was until last episode, and since then I've been checking out boot shivs all over the internet. CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, and Nikolay Ivanich Lobachevsky, who I believe might be from the Eastern Bloc, possibly, at Grim_Toys. Check out their, in particular, their Instagram account. I just find wonderful. Delusions at Noon. I have delusions all day long, so this particular group
just at noon. It's amazing.
Time. Yeah, I got to check that out. And Eric Wilson. And if you would like to become a patron, please visit Keith and Mike at patreon.com/KNM.
Well done.
That was impressive, I have to say.
He's all over it. Over it.
I think we went about 90 seconds on that. Usually try to keep it to 60, but I just went too far.
The creativity took you over.
Yeah. You guys, do you guys know all those people pretty well at this point? The page, do they write in and participate a lot, or are they just strictly, contribute?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, they are not. They are not as numerous as some other channels, but they are participatory, which is pretty awesome. We do appreciate that.
100%.
That really is. That's really, really cool.
It's super fun.
As long as they don't reinsert themselves as the executive chairman and remove other boards of directors and potentially ruin all of WWE, I'm all for Patreons.
It's possible, yeah. Well, I'm just hoping we get sold to the Saudis.
We'll take that blood money. We'll take that blood money.
Everyone else does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. So true. Mike, what are we talking about
Keith,
today?
you're gonna have to cover your head. I'm gonna need you in full head. We can't see anybody.
I would prefer it that way.
And that has nothing to do with the Saudis, by the way. Okay, folks. Things are going off the rails. All right. So I thought long and hard about this, and the truth is the following. I'm not bringing a guest onto the show. We're going to be talking about the premiere of The Last of Us on HBO Max. If you have not watched it, I suggest you skip forward on the video because we're going into full spoiler territory. There's just no way to talk about it without getting into the actual events of the first episode. We will not be spoiling later the plot as Nick and I are pretty familiar with the plot of the game, obviously. Keith,
I don't know.
Yeah. So we're not going to go into that territory, but if you haven't watched the first premiere and you'd want to go in unsullied, don't listen to this podcast. This is your spoiler warning. That is all you're getting. Let's talk, ladies and gentlemen, about The Last of Us on HBO Max. It premiered last night. I made the both of you watch it. Even though there was NFL playoff football taking place at the time. Keith went double screen. I didn't. I went in with the full lights off theater speaker system. Jen, my wife, under the covers. I said, screw the neighbors downstairs. Blast this thing. That's what we did. Nick, did you watch alone or did you have a team?
Nope. I brought Danielle in on it. Danielle, who was a huge fan of Game of Thrones, so she was familiar with the two main characters from an acting perspective. And I gave her no other background except just a little bit of the history of the game and how iconic the opening scene of the game is, but no details about that. So she went in very cold.
Okay, so the last thing of prep before we dive in is I want to talk a little bit about our experience with the game. I'll start. This was a game I started 3 times. When it came out, it was blowing everybody up. It was getting 10 out of 10 reviews. I had loved the Nathan Drake Naughty Dog Adventures, which are basically you are playing Indiana Jones, an adventure type game like that. And so I wanted to go into this and was much darker. And I was kind of zombied out because of The Walking Dead and because basically popular media had become a zombie apocalypse of its own. But I decided, this was the first game I decided, well, you know what? I'm just going to crank this bad boy down to very easy mode because the combat is great on these games, right? It's a lot of stealth combat. It's real-time crafting out of your backpack. So as things are coming at you, if you're trying to like make a med kit, you have to find a place to hide to do it because they will still kill you as you are crafting, which was kind of a novel thing. Some bow work, a lot of brutal hand-to-hand melee combat, which actually rears its head in the show. So once I did that, I think I remember I must have texted you, Nick. I texted everybody I knew. I played the first 13 minutes of the video game and had to put the controller down and sit there, weep, collect myself, and then decide if I wanted to proceed with the game. That's how impactful. The first 15 minutes of this video game, never experienced anything like it before or after. That's it. And so my biggest question going into the game going into the show was, can they repeat that moment emotionally for me? And if so, I'm all in on the show. So that's where I'm at. I ended up playing the first and second games. I love them. They're in the pantheon of my favorite experiences ever. Nick, I know you played as well, but I had to convince you to go to easy.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much convincing as I just, at that time, went into most games on regular mode because that's how you were encouraged to do it. So I didn't know that I could enjoy the story and gameplay as much on easy mode, which I very quickly switched to easy mode. And essentially it was a good decision. Now, as Mike has said before, I was in my infancy of being able to really tackle big titles at that time. I was not very good, not a lot of confidence, but going on to easy mode really did make the game more accessible. And then you start picking up how it works.
Now, when this came out, did this begin on the 4 or was this already back in the 3 days?
This was the 3 days. The original was released on the 3 and then remastered, I think twice, once for the 4 and then once again for the 5, I believe.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And an interesting fact about it was that whole opening sequence, which I think, Mike, like you said, it lasted about 15 minutes. was one of the earliest uses of like high-tech CGI motion capture integrating the opening of a game with the cinematic piece. So it really was like taking things to another step, and it worked. In fact, it was eerie watching the opening last night compared to how you play the game due to the similarities of that feel that kind of came from it. So that's just the quick background, Mike, was what you were asking for. Played through the first game. The second game, I just didn't feel like I was ready for a while. And Mike finally convinced me to play through just so I could get the narrative and the story down. And it's a much bigger game, or it feels like a bigger game in a lot of ways, although the themes and the story remain pretty tight. So I was excited going in last night.
We'll talk about those because that intro sequence and what Nick just said is actually a huge part of the whole meta narrative, which is about perspective and playing with perspective and from viewpoint, walking a mile in someone's shoes. And whilst the first game is very focused on the journey Joel and Ellie will take, things do change later in the narrative, but the show doesn't start out from Joel's perspective. It's pretty interesting, but we'll get there. Keith, your experience with The Last of Us, what have you heard? What did you know? What have aside from what I've?
I mean, kind of. I was peripherally aware of it. You certainly talked about it a lot, but because I'm Xbox based, it was never on my radar. So I really don't know anything other than what you've told me about it. But I can certainly, Nick, relate to that first time the video game integrated its sort of cinematic pieces and the gameplay, and it's not like you have the good cinematic and then like, oh, we downgraded into the gameplay. It's all one piece, and I feel like it was like Red Dead for the first time, just like, oh wait, we're in the game. And I love that transition into the game, and there isn't this huge downgrade from the pre-shot stuff.
Yeah, not to kind of like go into a whole different conversation, but I think that you bring up Red Dead a lot. We both have very strong feelings about both of those games, and I think that Rockstar Games and Naughty Dog Entertainment are operating on a whole different level of storytelling. They've really nailed the synergy of game and telling a narrative that the nuance can only be experienced through participation, through role play, really. And whereas like, in Grand Theft Auto and some other games, you can go kind of crazy. And I guess you can do that in Red Dead too. I think the real joy comes when you actually role play these characters and you kind of invest yourself into their through line. And that really is where the emotional impact comes from.
And when you get to the level of complexity in the game design, that how you play it affects everything. And so there are consequences if you want to go rogue or not, and it's not just practical. It's not like, oh, I get more coins, right? It's emotional. It's how people react to you. It's how you react to things. It's that level of complexity of storytelling is what's really exciting about continuing to move forward. Anyway, let's talk about the show.
So the big question comes down to, can that experience that I've always attributed and touted as this can only be experienced through a game, right? Because you're playing as these characters, can they do that on TV? Now, if anybody can do it, it's HBO because they throw all the monies at it. But the question for me moving in was, can they translate it? Question number 2, do I want to go back to the zombie well? Because ostensibly, even though there's a lot more nuance, in my opinion, in this narrative, it's a zombie story in a lot of ways. It's much more focused in the road, but that's what The Walking Dead did really well in the beginning too. It was much more of a human story than it was about the infected. So let's start there at the top. We find out early in the adventure what causes this outbreak. And the game had a really interesting way to flip perspective and have you play as this young girl named Sarah. You start as you start the game playing
you start
Sarah
as her.
So so a lot of that stuff you see in the first 20 minutes of the episode, you actually are controlling Sarah. You're seeing it through her eyes, which makes the first big twist pretty impactful, right? So let's start there. Keith, let's start with you as someone who's never played before. What did you think about the lore? Because what the game also does is we don't get the lore of the infected until later. We kind of learn it through visual storytelling rather than narrative. But we get it here at the top. We have an interview from back in the 60s. about virology. And Keith, your brother studies this. This is what he does for a living. So what did you feel about them and the specifics of it? And I know that parasite they talk about, that ant parasite, is real. That's a real thing.
Oh, well, the first thing I thought was, this is all the research I did for my books. Right, because I have a zombie series, right, or zombie-ish series, and investigating those parasites and the fungus and the sort of real-life zombies we see in the insect world. Yeah, it's like a real deal, and it was really, I was like, hey, but yeah, I mean, it's I love the using the scientific like the truly horrible things that exist in real life, just like absolutely skin crawlingly monstrous things in nature, and using that as your launching point for whatever your zombie monster thing is going to be. Yeah, no, I was like, yep, I've done all this research. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've also used it for a very similar purpose, and it was great. I liked it. Plus, I love the actor who sort of set it all up. He's from Spartacus. He was Batiatus in the Spartacus series, and it was amazing. So I was like, hell yeah, I get that. Let's do it.
So we're in, Nick. We start out. We meet Sarah. She's prepping for Joel's birthday. What did you think of those opening few moments before things get a little weird?
So for me, having watched the opening of the show in an obvious comparison to the video game, which you just have to do, that's just kind of what happens. It all worked for me. I felt that the cold open was definitely, well, I guess it wouldn't be the cold open, the open. It definitely went a little slower. And I think part of that was to kind of set a tone to surprise the audience when they're overwhelmed by the apocalypse. And the best way I can sum it up was Danielle, when the moment comes where the soldier who becomes, Fedra, essentially shoots and kills your daughter. Danielle just goes, "Whoa, I didn't see that coming." And
Great.
then the screen comes up 20 years later, and then there you go. So it, for someone who had never seen it or knew what was happening, it definitely worked for Danielle. And I found myself much more connected to the daughter in the TV show than I did. I was more sad in the video game for Joel losing his daughter, as opposed to feeling super connected to the daughter, because the daughter in the video game open was more representative of us being thrown into this thing that was starting, whereas the show wanted you to, and clearly was accomplished, making you care about this person, which is going to inform a lot of what happens later, obviously. And like Mike said, the whole thing is about perspective and time in a lot of ways, and I think it was a good setup for it.
Yeah, the game really starts, the cold open of the game starts her waking up from sounds. So when you see Sarah after she falls asleep and Joel's gone, after Tommy calls him to bail him out, so that is all new stuff. And for me, Nick, it's interesting because I felt a lot more connected to the daughter. Not more. I felt very connected to the daughter because I play video games I look at everything. I go in every room. I hear every tidbit. So I experience the game as her for quite a while. But since we don't get that option in this show, some of the added things really worked for me. All the stuff from the next door neighbors, like that, none of that context is in the game. You just see zombie next door neighbor run at the door, right? And so what I really loved was that scene with Sarah when she goes into the next door neighbor's house, and you see the transformation happening with the grandma. That first kind of patient zero type
Super cool
experience.
Yeah, love that.
Was awesome. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a horror show. Right, there's going to be some suspense elements, not just the kind of gory zombies, which we got a lot of in Walking Dead. This was very much suspenseful and horror, and I loved all that. And it really does. The actress, I have to shout it out. I don't have the IMDb pulled up. The actress who plays the daughter,
just great,
incredible. And knowing going in, you've got 30 minutes of screen time, and then you done, girl. She poured herself into that performance, and it was so visceral and made that moment, like you said, Nick, with Joel. And there were so many things when she walks into the bathroom. That's from the game. That when they're in the alley running away, there's so many nods to the game, Easter eggs, and I think they really heightened that this episode because they're going to kind of get away from it a little bit more, is my feeling. I think they're letting you know we know what's happening. The other thing I want to shout out before we get to the time jump is One thing that Naughty Dog has always excelled at, technically, is their visual, but their sound design. Video games are incredible in immersive sound design and using panning and such. Now, I watch a lot of content on my 5.1 Dolby Atmos system. Nothing has utilized Dolby panning and immersive sound like this show has on television, even streaming television, has sounded this good. I was jacked. The dog was over here, was panned over there. The zombies running past you and behind you. The immersion was absolutely incredible. It was also visually just stunning and beautiful, and the performances, all that stuff. Anyway, time jump, Keith. I want to just kind of hear about your experience with the episode through your eyes. Nick, we'll pip and pop in as we can, but I want Keith, I want you to drive this because you don't have the context we have.
First off, the little girl in the opening is Nico Parker.
Amazing performance.
Who I thought she was fantastic. So I mean, I thought the opening was very effective. I thought it was great. You know, I knew she was going to die. I think there's just sort of, you know, part of that is like I've seen the poster.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I know she's not going to make it. And from a storyteller perspective, I'm like, oh, I get it. We need to have the shocking death, which motivates the whatever. That said, even though I knew it was coming, I thought it was really beautifully done. The transformation of the first zombie old lady, I thought that was great, very subtle, very effective. The first thing that got a visceral reaction from me was seeing the stuff coming out of her mouth, like the little zombie hair, whatever the hell that was. I was like, whoa. So that surprised me. The other thing that got a reaction from me was the plane crash, which I didn't really watch the trailer that closely, so I didn't know it was coming, and I was like, oh shit, which is not, I don't usually react like that, so I liked that. That was amazing. And then the other, I was shocked that we went forward 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting it to be like 3 years later, but 20 years. I was like, oh wow, that is a big leap. So I was totally in, you know, at that point. And then, you know, do you want me to keep talking about the?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of. So I'll point out that like after the time jump, one of my, I think, favorite parts of the entire episode actually was the first maybe 6 minutes after the time jump, because rather than play as Joel for a day and see how things have changed in his life, they had to establish what the world was now. And they did so with almost no dialogue, which I thought was great. That first scene with the kid stumbling through, we learn how the kind of police state has been set up. That kid comes in, you see the poster about the progression of the zombies, and so you figure out how kind of that all works. We don't have to hear anything, no exposition dump. We just see a poster. You learn that from video game design, right? It's all visual storytelling. They find out the kid is sick. The Green Arrow, they make him feel all comfortable. They shoot him in the neck with something. Next scene, it's freaking Joel throwing his body into a fire.
Yeah, I thought that was very effective, and I thought the performance. I don't see the woman who played the sort of nurse talking to him. Mm-hmm. She did a phenomenal job in that scene.
And then we quickly learn who Fedra is. We quickly learn Joel's place in this. He's basically Red from Shawshank Redemption. He's a man who can procure things and
starts out as a drug dealer. I was like, oh, okay,
transport things.
A turn.
And we meet Tess, and this is the first change for me because in the video game I have almost no connection to Tess. She's kind of like a broad who's lived in this world, and I don't really sense the connection. But I really like her performance in this episode really well too. Her relationship with Joel, their kind of whole thing, how they meet the Fireflies.
Is a terrific actress as well.
But I know all the lore, so Keith, real quick, I'll jump to you again.
Yeah.
The Fireflies, the kind of the back and forth, what's going on with, was it confusing or did it seem pretty well laid out for you?
I mean, I got it. You know, I'm not sure how invested I was in it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think the political machinations of this world were the least interesting part about this for me. And I was like, yeah, I mean, of course, there's going to be some sort of resistance to this authoritarian sort of regime or whatever. I don't really know what makes them interesting or special other than like, yeah, I get that that's happening and I get that that would be happening, but I don't really, it wasn't clear to me what their goal was other than resisting the authoritarian sort of a world there. Um, knowing the situation of what's going on, like I would have loved to have seen a better reason for them to be resisting at this point.
Mm.
Because obviously the rules and whatever is pretty draconian, but I feel like it kind of had to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't quite sure what their point was. I get that, I could tell we were supposed to be sympathetic to them, right? But I wasn't sure why I cared yet.
Interesting. I don't know that I felt that we had to be sympathetic to them, only because from Joel's perspective, he was between the lines, right? He doesn't really give a crap one way or the other.
No, but I sort of like took that as he's on his like nihilistic journey, right?
Right.
Where, it's our hero's journey, like, oh, I've got trauma, so I don't give a crap about anything, and then I slowly get pulled into fighting for the good guys.
Well, Nick, I'll ask you: is Keith's response indicative of them trying to do too much table setting in the in the first 45 minutes, whereas in a game you've got 6 hours of exploration?
I mean, I'm going to base it off of someone who had no idea about the story prior. So as Danielle's watching, she got confused after the time jump a little bit, right? So I had to give her a little exposition. And I think part of that is what Geet said, is that as you're watching the opening scene with the infected kid, which I thought was fantastic, you're not seeing Fedra as the bad guys. And I don't think you're meant to. And you see more of the Fireflies than you do in the game intro. The Fireflies in the first couple segments of the game are more of the they exist, but you don't know who or what they are, and it's more of a I'm trying to think of a comparison. V for Vigilante, like that idea initially. Whereas what they did try to do, I feel like Mike was trying to say, both of these organizations have problems. Neither of them are perfect. And Joel is obviously clearly not supporting either. So where are we going to go? However, going back, Danielle was a little confused. So I think that does bear part of the story we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that element of it is where it lost me a little bit. I was like, I don't know how much I care, but like I was anxious, but halfway through, I was anxious for him to get on the road.
Yeah, and
I was like, I don't know if I care about a lot of this.
I had a little bit of a fear because at 2 separate times they pull Ellie aside and they're like, "We have to tell you what's up," and then they pan away. So they're keeping some bit of information from us, the viewer.
And but what was up was super obvious.
Yeah.
I knew immediately what her deal was and why she was special. I don't know why they held that back, because that
was my fear. My fear was that they were going to keep that for episodes. And I was like, it's a motivation. It's not particularly important to Joel because that's not what the story really ends up being. But, well, we'll see. Right. That's not wholly true. But regardless, it's the driving motivation, at least initially. And I couldn't wait for them to tell us. And I was so afraid they were going to hide it. But I think the way where they saved it to reveal it was more effective, right? Because ostensibly they're captured as soon as they get off on the road, and they're all tested, and Ellie comes up that she's sick, yet not experiencing any of the symptoms, which is indicative that maybe
I think
special.
That it's a great story. It makes sense as the obvious story. It would have been a lot better if we haven't had a lot of stories like that. The one immune person, we must save the immune person. There's going to save humanity. We've seen this on The Walking Dead. We've seen this on, every apocalyptic zombie story has one person who's immune and we have to save them, right? So it's not the show's fault. It's just the fault of the environment that it lives in. The fact that we get this story, and I get that it's not going to be about that. But I was ahead of it at that point.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess that's some of my. We can talk about like some favorite parts going in. I think my biggest question remaining is because once again, with the context, I can confidently tell you, Keith, stick with it because it ends up not being about that. It's about that, but it's not about that.
No, of course.
But the question then becomes, will enough people be intrigued, or will they be put off by the fact that it feels samey narratively? That's the question. But it's also HBO. People are going to watch it.
But and also like I'm not your average viewer. Like I've I've seen all the zombie things in the world. I've written 2 zombie novels. Like I'm in that world, right? It's like talking about theater. Like I've been in this world a lot, so like it's not necessarily as obvious to everybody else who hasn't spent a lot of time in this genre.
But also the action is incredible. The performances are incredible. The cinematography is incredible. And the CGI was really good that we've seen so far. And we haven't even seen the monsters, Nick. The monster design, Keith, the clickers, the guys, the people you're going to meet in the coming weeks. I'm so excited for you to be on the journey.
I got really excited when I saw like the guy splooshed up on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, now that's a design that I haven't seen before. It's scary. It's interesting. I don't like what's going on there. That got me excited.
Yeah, the infected are different, and I'm excited for you to get your opinion when that comes around. Nick, some thoughts on stuff?
Yeah, I think there's 4 things that are going on all at the same time, and all of them except one I think were done well. So you've got the creators clearly in mind you have people who've played the game, you have zombie genre fans, right? You have people who enjoy the HBO prestige, and then you have the total person just coming in cold because, it came highly recommended or whatever. As Keith's talking, he was ahead of it because there were so many tip-offs to the traditional genre of zombie storytelling. The daughter, Sarah, is it Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah. When Sarah goes to the neighbor's house into the kitchen, that's just about straight out of Dawn of the Dead. You know what I mean? Like it's almost the neighbor's house. Like literally, they're tipping off. We're kind of going to give you this type of zombie story, sort of.
The first time you see the grandma just staring at her, you're like, oh yeah, that lady's fucked.
Of course.
Yep.
and then we're starting to do the math. Like, oh, is it fast zombies or slow zombies?
Exactly. Yep. And I love that they gave you the old lady fast zombie. So it's like, okay. Right. So
and so we learned it's like fast but clumsy.
Right, setting the rule the multiple times they would trip over stairs and not be able to navigate some of the fine motor stuff. Right, so super smart stuff happening there. Then for the game fans, right, not just necessarily narrative, you had the scene with the zombie on the wall, and they totally established one of the biggest tropes in the game, which is the flashlight in the dark. Because you play so much of both games in the dark with the flashlight or not with the flashlight, and then they give you that whole scene of Tess and Joel going through and finding, the one dead, zombie infected.
And as soon as they went into the subway, I'm like, oh, this is a great scene in the game. Like going through the subway tunnels, totally see where they're going. This is gonna be a great game.
And all the design and each piece of that, and then the final setup to that, Mike, is the tease for the next episode. Is a huge tease for people who've played the game because you're going into a particular scene where that was, for me, that was the most nerve-wracking part of the whole first game. So episode 2 is going to give us that, I think. My only gripe is that they did all these smart things for all these different audiences, and then the only part of the entire thing that pulled me out of it was right at the end, right, where the soldier who Joel had a pre-established, kind of relationship with pulls the gun's on Ellie, and we do you do the blended flashback that shows the moment his daughter was shot. I'm like, that happened less than a half an hour ago. You didn't need
that. No.
You didn't need to beat us over the head with it. Like so my only concern from the entire episode is why did they feel the need to beat us over the head with that when they didn't do that in any other way throughout the whole other part of the episode?
It's an interesting tidbit you bring up there because
I agree completely.
The best part of the game, right, and this isn't a spoiler, is that it takes 40 to 60 hours of adventuring with the two of them for Joel to let Ellie into his heart. And I mean, clearly there's the setup of his daughter's dead, so he's going to be protective of this girl. I mean, it's not a shocker.
Right.
But
Surrogate daughter.
But you earn that over 60 hours of gameplay and incredible battle sequences and horror for him to trauma bond with her, right? But they are teasing it so early here. It's almost like, please don't be the show that's going to hit me over the head with it every 20 minutes. Now, I trust Neil enough to know that I hope that's not going to happen. But you're right. That is a gripe.
And I think that maybe that's the thing that I would really I hope moving forward is that it's really well shot, it's really well done, the effects are great, the actors, I love every single actor that has come on, like, oh, I know who that is, they're great great character work. Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, I'm 100% on board, the casting is great. I would love for it to be 7% smarter than it is. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that unnecessary flashback. It's just like treating the audience as like 10 IQ points below what they actually are. And I would love for them just to like, yeah, I mean, it's tough. Pilots are so hard. Pilots are freaking impossible. And when you have the world building that they had to accomplish in this is astoundingly amount of but I feel like they could have zoomed in a little bit and let us discover a little bit more of it later. That would have been a little bit more compelling if we'd stayed on the characters. And yeah, I don't think we needed to know as much as we did about the Fireflies and the dystopian whatevers. And I think we could have spent a little bit more time.
Okay, I agree, Keith. It's like to tie exactly what Keith's saying. You're right before the time jump. Everything they showed you before the time jump, none of that, aside from the little talk show piece, none of that was explicitly giving you information. Right? There was no exposition dump. It was all showing you. Yeah. And then as you come into the second half, that's the part where it's like we're talking about Fedra, we're talking about the Fireflies. It started to. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Keith.
If those things are going to be important moving forward, you can give me a lot of that later. If these things aren't that important, I don't want to know. I don't care.
I think there's a version of this script, a version of this pilot that ends with the death, like before the time jump. I think it was that was that zoomed in. It was that specific. I think it was that powerful. They could have done it. Now, I understand what they were trying to do in that 90 minutes. They had a lot to do. They had a lot of masters to serve. I think what the pilot did for me, with all of those gripes noted, and I agree with them, is they did enough to let me know that they're in good hands, that they've learned lessons from telling the story in the game that they're going to employ here. They tried to set all the dominoes, and I have a feeling that I can now let the show be its own thing. I think that's what they were trying to do to my audience, and I think it was effective. I think it was a little overstuffed. I agree with that, but I think they're going to slow down now. At the same, they also have 9 episodes. So we have. I don't know if they'll all be 90 minutes. My guess is they'll probably be more like an hour.
An hour, yeah.
But I don't know. It could be wrong.
No.
Anyway,
I liked it. I'm going to watch episode 2.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay. I mean, I guess that's the point. I guess where do you fall, Nick? Where is your hype level?
I'm trying to stay away from too much internet information about what's coming. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like I read the couple initial interviews with Druckmann saying that they're gonna build enough and change enough to keep everyone interested. And it's not just a strict retelling of the game. The things I liked far outweighed the tiny gripes, which were all in the second half completely. My favorite scene of the entire first episode was when they were in the truck, third person perspective over Sarah's shoulder, and they're passing the first burning farm with the people trying to get into their truck, calling for help. Mm-hmm. And his brother says they had a kid, and he says, "So do we." And then there's a beat pause. He kind of looks back at Sarah and says, "Someone else will come along," mm-hmm. which is a big line from the game.
Yep.
And that start like for me, that was the scene that said, this is the same Joel from the video game. Because Keith, you mentioned like, okay, is it going to be the hero's journey where he falls in love with Ellie, as a child and becomes a good person? But they give you hints that by definition, he's not your typical hero, right? He's not Luke Skywalker who's going to save everybody. He clearly was like, we're going to pass by this family with a kid straight up on the road. We're going to worry about our own.
He's a survivor. Yeah.
He's a survivor. Exactly.
And I agree with you that I think that was the most successful sequence. I think in that through like the first time he gets chased through the building or whatever, because they did a really effective job of giving us the sensation of being trapped. Right. They try to go north. They try to go west. They try to go south. And the sort of trapped desperation, the claustrophobia. They're driving away in a truck at 60 miles an hour, and yet it's still claustrophobic, even though we don't know what's going on. I thought that was very, very effective.
Yeah, and that sequence Nick brought up was beat for beat in the game.
I'm sure.
Line for line. And the thing I actually liked, speaking of, from the game's perspective, is very much earlier on, when Joel finally comes home and they have the scene on the couch where they're watching TV and she gives him the watch. That basically plays out almost exactly like the game, except they're sitting on the opposite side of the couch, which is clearly a perspective change in saying this is the same scene, but it's different. We reshuffled it, and I think that's the creators telling me it's going to be different. It's the same, but it's different. Be cool with it, and it was. And there's an added line in that scene which tells me they're learning lessons because she says you didn't bring the cake. And then he's like, I'll get it tomorrow. And he goes, do you swear? Yeah, I swear. But we all know there's no tomorrow, right? So there's so many little great breadcrumbs laid. I think there's this is an episode that showed me the potential. Now, where are we going to go with that? And we give it, Keith, we've talked about it on all our other shows. You give it the pilot benefit of the doubt, right?
100%. Pilots are so hard.
But potential is nothing if squandered. So, HBO has the pedigree. HBO has the precedent most of the time. I mean, Westworld begs to differ, but we'll see where we go. We're excited. We'll check back in after a couple episodes because we are pretty excited.
One last point on that, Mike, because you mentioned Westworld, and I don't think you can't move away without now talking about the Westworld part. You look at the source material from Westworld, right? And you look at the second HBO really started to go beyond it, and then you can start saying, "Ooh, this is where things started to fall apart a little bit, maybe." This current, like if you look at how much content there is, that's where a show like this risks potentially falling apart, and that's not going to be after, I guess, until like season 3. If they move through the first and the second game, it could have become one of those too much of a good thing, sort of like Walking Dead eventually did when they got past, where they were, Game of Thrones, all of the HBO fail safes. Will they get this one right in the long run? And for me, as long as we get past the first game, I can separate the two and not even look at future seasons if we never make it to the second game. But it's the same dilemma HBO always finds himself in. So we'll see what they've learned.
The last thing I'll say, which is just silly, one of the things that I noticed was in all of the scenes in the city or whatever, the paint on the wall look like it has completely crumbled and all this crazy patina and destruction, whatever. And I'm like, I have plenty of paint in my house that's more than 20 years old. It doesn't look like that. Like, what happened in the 20 years that all the paint like it's from the 1600s? Like, no, you kind of, I get you want to set it up and it's dystopian or whatever, but like, it's just random paint on a wall. It's
well, Keith, in this universe, clearly global warming has advanced past where it has here because they had to increase that humidity level. So maybe it's just the humidity. Come on, they gave you enough. Get over yourself. All right. Speaking of getting over yourself, let's discuss something vitally important to the three of us. And that, to me, I don't know which one it is. I think it's this one. Yes. Is the fact that my Philadelphia Eagles will be destroying Keith's New York Giants next week in the NFL divisional playoffs for the NFC. But before we get to that specifics, I just want to we're talking about storytelling, people. there's almost no story. It almost never fails to deliver. And Nick texted me this yesterday. There's just something special about NFL playoffs. There's the stories, the stakes, the fact that even though there are clear, especially in the wild card round, which was this past weekend, there should be just blowouts. You should know exactly who's going to win. It's high seed versus low seed. And almost indefinitely, there are incredible comebacks, incredible stories, and things that shouldn't happen that happen. One of them being Keith's New York Giants, who, if you judge by they probably shouldn't even be in the playoffs, right? It's a definition of like a wild card. And they come in, they take off the Vikings, who have been incredible, and now they're going to the divisional round. Keith, they're 2 wins away from the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it's, my New York Football Giants have been so bad for so long, and it's, and I've written, talk about a hero's journey. Daniel Jones, right? Who, my brother Eric was over yesterday. We were watching the game together, and we were talking like every Giants fan in history owes that man an apology, because the number of times I have written him off and waxed eloquent about how he's never going to be a winning quarterback in the NFL, blah, 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 blah.
See Jalen Hurts circa last 2 seasons.
100%. And I think what you see is when you have good coaching and good chemistry and good mentality in the locker room, if you take a team, play smart, don't make mistakes, that is winning football. More than, talent is very important. Superstars are very important, but primarily play smart, know your role, do your job. That beats a lot of teams. And, the Giants of this season have very little talent. Our receiving core was on the street in Halloween, and yet they're doing amazing work right now. Half of our defense was on the street. We've retreads and leftovers and practice squad players on the team. But if you're really well coached and you're really disciplined, and then you allow players who haven't had a chance before to step up and make some plays. And it's very exciting. The Eagles coming up next week, the Eagles are a wildly more talented roster. Like the number of like A+ players you guys have are well above ours. However, I think we've got a puncher's chance because, we've proven now that we, at least in the first round, have not made any mistakes. We're playing smart, we're playing hard, we're playing focused. And, some of these Eagles, we haven't had a chance yet. We haven't seen them in the playoffs yet. And a turnover here, a turnover there. If I was saying saying to Eric yesterday for our defense, right? It's not about stopping every drive, and it's not about preventing every point. My goal for them against Minnesota was just make it difficult. Mm-hmm. Let them get the first down, but force them to go through third down to do it, right? Let them score the points, but have it be a field goal. And if we just keep making them have to convert third downs and kick field goals, we got a chance. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same thing. The Eagles are so explosive, right? They might just pop off an 80-yard touchdown the first play, and we're going to have to overcome that. And we don't have the talent to come back by 21 points in the second half.
Nick, I'll let you talk about the Eagles in just a second. I will say that the big question on our side, Keith, has been the consistency of scheme, consistency of coaching, and there are a lot of question marks going into next week. But I'll let Nick talk about that in a second. I want to compare the New York Giants, why I was kind of rooting for them this week. It's not just because I want to see an NFC East showdown, which is mostly the reason. And it's not because I think we can beat them. I just think it's going to be the best game for us as fans. But I'll say the New York Giants this year remind me so much of the Philadelphia Phillies, the baseball team of this season. A team that showed a lot of potential in the beginning, did not play up to that potential from a lot of the season, had to use the backdoor wildcard slot to get into the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, they exploded, and they were playing with heart, and they were playing with fun, and they were the underdogs, and you were rooting for them, and players were stepping up that you didn't think were going to step up, young guys who you had written off or didn't think should make the main roster. So much fun to be a part of. Difference between the NFL and baseball, though, is that you got 7-game series in baseball. So generally over 7 games, the better team, the more talented team wins out.
Right.
In football, it's any given Sunday. You play a stinker of a game, which the Eagles have been prone to do. And it's also very difficult to beat a team 3 times in one season. The challenge stacks up for the Philadelphia Eagles.
We punched you in the nose with our third stringers last week.
We've been known to snooze. Okay, so that's the question marks. Nick, your feelings though. I know a lot of people have been down on the Eagles because they didn't, they rested some players and there's this and there's that. But we had a hell of a season. Best team in the NFL, I think, most consistently talented, explosive team in the NFL. By all intents and purposes, we should win this football game, but how do you feel?
I'm a big fan in the playoffs of momentum, and I feel like that's the one thing the Eagles don't have is momentum, and that's what the Giants do have. So I think that's the Giants' biggest advantage, in addition to having Saquon Barkley, who, when you look at he causes those scheme adjustments that we're going to have to consider going into play them again. Now, I put less stock in that second football game because clearly, Hurts isn't at 100%. They totally ran an offense that was meant to not let him do what he does, which made it easier on the Giants defense to figure that all out. So I think a big question next week is going to be what Eagles enter the game. How healthy are they going to be? And then can they establish momentum early? Keith said it, though, the biggest thing in NFL playoffs is going to be mistakes, which often is turnovers. I don't see that being an issue really for either team next week. So I think it's really going to be about number one, is the Giants defense going to be able to stop a full powered Jalen Hurts offense where he's allowed to move? And then what is the Eagles defense? Will they be able to generate a mistake or two? You know what I mean? So the Eagles should win this game, right? For obviously. Sure. But the Vikings should have won the game too. So two very different teams, but
no, for sure. I mean, I think the Giants are a better team than people think they are.
Yes.
For a lot of these reasons, like we didn't just sneak into the playoffs; we made the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't like an 8-8 team that made it. We rested our, we were 9-6-1. But we didn't try to win the last game. I mean, like we easily could have been a 10-win game, right? 10-win team. But but we're not built to come from behind. We are built to keep it within one score in the fourth quarter, then be clutch. And that's really it.
And that's where I think the Giants are the best matchup for us this week, which is what I think the X factor will be, in my opinion, because of what Keith just said. Because the difference between Eagles-Vikings, Eagles-Giants this coming week is that this is going to be a home playoff game for us.
Yeah.
And if the World Series is any indication, if the divisional round of the MLB playoffs this past season is any indication, Philly sports fans are hungry. And that home crowd would have been juiced for the Vikings, no doubt. It's the first home playoff game in a little while, in a spell. But with a divisional rival coming in, the New York Giants coming in, it's right up there with when the Cowboys show up. I mean, it's going to be
fire.
It's going to be fire. That is the atmosphere I'm hoping that will put the Eagles offense up 2-3 scores early. If we can establish that kind of headspace, that kind of a gap, I think we have a shot, because the Giants defense hasn't been stellar the past few games.
I disagree, actually.
Punch for punch with the Vikings, that's a lot of points, man.
Yeah, the Vikings are a really good offense.
It's true.
Really, and we shut down what's his nuts, best receiver in the league. We got beat up by their tight end. We're a bend but don't break. We're a much better defense than I think you're thinking we are.
I don't disagree. The question will be, can the Eagles commit to the run a bit? Because when we let our offensive line do what they do, it's really tough. We wear teams down, but they get away from that. That's our biggest coaching issues. We get pass happy because of what Hurts can do with his legs. Nick, you wanted to say?
I was just going to chime in and say that I think that's the biggest point from the last game. The second game we played against the Giants is that we established the run game when Hurts is a threat both in the air and on the ground, right? So we knew he wasn't going to be that, and he wasn't that. So that that it's going to look very different just play to play in the next game, and that again should play to the Eagles' advantage. But like Keith's saying too, and I agree, I think the Giants' defense is better than they're getting credit for. They didn't make a lot of mistakes in that game, even though the Vikings put a lot of points on the board. You know what I mean? Like they weren't it wasn't playing from behind. It was
no.
I felt like it was a well coached game as opposed to what we saw last night. Right? How many Baltimore had? I think 4.
So sloppy.
Ridiculous calls there, and you didn't see that from.
No.
And I don't think you're going to see that from the Giants.
No,
so that's what makes it interesting.
Like I just want to make you guys convert third downs. Like if you have to convert third downs, we've got a chance. Like that's and the X factor for us on the offensive side of the ball is Daniel Jones and his feet, and the fact that his threat, he had more rushing yards than Hurts did, and his threat. The reason
he's going to be healthier than Hurts, that's for sure too.
He's healthy, and the reason Barkley was so effective, he only had 9 carries against Minnesota, but there was like 15 option plays where the Vikings said, all right, we're going to cover him, and then Jones just gashed him for 12 over and over and over again. That's the choice that the Vikings had to make, and that's the choice you're going to have to make too.
Well, speaking of choices, last point I want to make is I am a big question mark on our coach Nick Sirianni. I think he's overly aggressive. I think he gets too emotionally invested. He's a young dude. I think at home he's going to be over the top. I think if your D shows up and can force a lot of fourth downs in places where we shouldn't be going for it, I think you're going to be putting yourself in great field position. This all said, 2 more points. 1, love this conversation. I really do hope next Monday we're talking about a 42-12 blowout. That's my hope. I don't see that happening. 2,
27-24. That's my dream.
Okay. All right. You mark it here. One thing I think we all can agree on. Can we just see Dallas embarrass themselves tonight?
But here's the thing. I hate Dallas with every fiber of my being at the cellular level. I also hate Tom Brady at the same level. Brady. So I'm not hoping for either team to win. I'm hoping for a meteor.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so let's go around one more time. Just quick pip and pop. Keith, I know there's something else you want to talk about. Nick, we'll jump in if you got anything else that's going to get you through this week or got you through last week. Sorry we're going long, folks. We had some technical stuff. But Keith, let's go back to you. What do you want to mention?
Yeah, I talk about like things I'm consuming this week. And I want to recommend the podcast Ultra, which is it's like a 6 or 8 part investigative historical podcast. And what it's about is it is about the Nazi infiltration of the U.S. political system in the 30s and 40s that was well reported on, well established at the time, and we forgot. And so this is an impeccably researched historical podcast talking about how there was 25 plus members of Congress, Senate and Congress, who were actively colluding with the Nazis before and during World War II as part of the America First movement at that point. And how what was happening well before the war even started were using a congressional system, which still exists to this day. Congress wanted to set it up so to make it easy for Congress people to communicate with their constituents. And what that meant is anything put into the congressional record could be printed and mailed for free to any congressional person's constituency. So what happened was a couple of the congressmen who basically were co-opted or actively chose to participate with the Nazis were given speeches written by Nazi propagandists, which they read into the congressional record. Then they printed and mailed to all their constituencies, hundreds of thousands all over the country, sending out, we're taxpayers paying to send Nazi propaganda to our people through our Congress people. And and they discovered all of this information in the Nazi records about how they specifically worked to create chaos within our country, drive wedges on race and religion and economic status within our country specifically, and that there was a giant sedition trial that took place with all of these people. They had them all dead to rights, and what they did, the defendants made such a mess of the trial, of such a chaotic, terrible mess of the trial. It went on for about a year and a half. They were only about a third of the way through until the judge literally dropped dead. And it's this stunning, the parallels from today and then are obvious, right? Including some of the messaging of the America First messaging, that kind of stuff. But these are sitting senators and congressmen, doing the Nazi salute under a Nazi flag on American soil while currently serving, working with Nazi agents actively, taking money from them, participating with them before and during the war, trying to keep us out of World War II, which is what the Nazis wanted. And this was a huge part of of our culture in the 30s and 40s, and we've just forgotten. And all of this reporting and all of this isn't some like weird expose that they found this new information or whatever. No, this is literally just going back to the Library of Congress and reading the papers from that time. And this was all stuff that we knew about and just sort of forgot. And it's so much more than that. But I really recommend check out Ultra. It's an MSNBC like 8-part podcast. It is absolutely jaw-dropping, both from like, I can't believe this happened, but also with the parallels to today. It's scary, but really, really fascinating. You wouldn't believe it if you didn't actually see all of the work that they did. And it's all there. It's all very much available to all of us. This information, we just sort of as a culture decided to select all and delete, and now it's happening again. So there it is. Check it out.
Yeah, I think we won't get too deep into it. That's a great recommendation. I will say one thing you and Nick share, Keith, that I always appreciate and bring back to myself, because I will admit that, we've actually had some. I really appreciate our listeners who clearly are very different on the political spectrum, how civil and how kind, well, for the most part, kind the discourse has been, respecting one another. So we'd like to keep that up, in fact. But on top of that, I think wherever you sit on the spectrum, it's disheartening to look at the dysfunction in Congress, in our politics, the dark money in our politics. I think we all agree it would be great if the people we were attempting to elect or have already elected gave two shits about us. And it becomes pretty clear that is not the driving motivation.
Of course they don't. But I think for me, what is disheartening about this is it has nothing to do with the partisan and what party, whatever side was whatever side. What's disheartening about this is the fact that we do not learn from our own history.
Yes.
And like, it is disheartening that I'm a history nerd, especially like 20th century political history is my jam, and I didn't know this. Mm-hmm. And if you do not learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. We are all fallible in the same way. Our 100 years ago, we had the same fallibilities that we have today, and the same type of people exploited in the same type of way over and over and over again. And it is only because we forget about stuff like this that we leave ourselves
new and shiny,
vulnerable
something
to
new
it
and
happening
shiny
again. It's not new and shiny. It's the same exact playbook,
Right.
and we forget about it, and we don't learn from our own history. So,
I think the point I was making initially was that you guys share. I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent. Is that you both often remind me that really where we should be paying attention, and so seldomly we do, and I've been trying to be better about this, is local politics, because that's where you can actually affect some change. And often you go in, people vote, and you vote for the two names at the top, and then you kind of just like don't look at the little things. So Nick, I know you work in education, so local politics is actually really important in your line of work, but also it's where you actually have some agency.
Well, and I don't want to go, extend this too much, but just based on the exact scenario Keith is talking about, take a look at any local school board these days, and over the past year, whether it's the groups on the left or the groups on the right that have been aiming to take over school boards, and look at what the platforms they've been advocating, right, and then tie it into exactly the topic Keith's talking about with the Ultra podcast, and the similarities are uncanny, and that's playing out at a local level.
Well, and that's the thing. Like we're debating banning books now, as if that's when did that not work out well before? I forget. I feel like there was a point where that didn't work out so hot.
Nick, what's the story? I don't want to. What's the story of that lady who came in and she was? I don't even remember the point she was trying to make, but she like faked that she was passing out on carbon dioxide because she had a mask on. It was like she did a whole play, Keith. It was so theatrical, and it was like it was kabuki, yeah.
Yeah, it is, and it's exactly the type of thing that any take this, a foreign adversary wanting to weaken the United States finds and exploits stuff exactly like that to draw a wedge so that we're all wrapped up in our own chaos and we don't notice what they're doing over there or what they're doing to us. It's the same playbook over and over and over again, and we fall into it. We're dealing with this lady doing the kabuki with the mask, and we're not noticing, oh God, this huge thing happening, and that's the consequences weren't so hot when we screwed it up last time. Perhaps we should, do some cursory history, but that's part of the school board. They want to take this stuff out of our history, so we don't know, we don't remember, and history, guys, know your history. It's so important.
All right, Nick, was there anything you wanted to mention?
Yeah, just, you brought me in last time as an expert on pro wrestling, or, self-proclaimed expert on pro wrestling. And this is a historical time behind the scenes in pro wrestling. And I just think it should be noted, if for nothing else, for posterity's sake, for those who have been fans of the action inside the squared circle, I would argue that what's taking place behind the scenes right now is more interesting than any storyline probably in the history of pro wrestling. You've got a company that is currently valuated at approximately $8.7 billion. That's the WWE.
That's two Lucas Arts.
It's a lot, right? That's a lot of money. As Keith and I were talking off the air, all of the content that WWE owns, and I would probably wager that it's about 80% of all pro wrestling content in history on the planet. So you've got that at stake. And then you've got all the TV contracts coming up at stake. And a situation where it's anybody's guess in regards to how and why it's playing out like this. Was this all a plan from when Vince stepped down 7 months ago? Was this the plan all along for him to come back and for them to sell? Or, is it more diabolical than that? And, if people forget that when Vince stepped away, Stephanie had already announced she was taking a leave of absence. And then she reneged on that to become co-CEO. Now she's gone entirely. And you've got all these groups rumored to be the ones that are going to buy WWE, whether it's Endeavor, who bought UFC for $6 billion, Comcast, NBC Universal, Disney. And then this conglomerate of Saudi Arabia companies, which presents a whole other moral and ethical potential dilemma. It's a fascinating time to be watching.
Tony Khan going to buy it.
Which a whole other... I think the implications there would be fascinating. And also, when you look at the way Vince put himself back into power, whether that was pre-planned or not, whether people knew it was coming or not, there's already rumors this morning, saying that Vince is already submitting notes his opinion on creative, which he said he wouldn't get involved in.
He can't stop himself. I mean, like,
right?
I don't think he planned to leave. Obviously, he got forced out because of all the allegations. But it seems like this sale has been percolating for years.
Well, yeah, it comes up every time you're about a year out from negotiating the TV rights. They start talking about is a sale coming, and a lot of what you're reading right now is that Fox overpaid. This is going to have a huge impact on TV rights. That's very stupid economics when people are talking that way, because they're just looking at a number system that was based on old ratings, not looking at digital media content and the way that the economy is working today. You can't say that they overpaid. Which just makes this whole thing more interesting.
The archive and the Netflix of it all, your first run commercial airings are nothing.
Correct.
It's the library. It's the endless expansion of your library. It's an asset for forever. It's a seed.
Yeah.
It's not your product. It's a seed for the thing moving forward. And the palace intrigue of it, the family intrigue of it.
Yes.
Look, it's all interesting to me. To be 100% honest, what I'm most interested in the whole thing is about 5 years from now when we get the documentary, because I'm a documentary whore, and that is going to be one hell of a behind the scene.
Yeah, it sure will be. I mean, and if a sale is truly imminent, which all indicators say it is, everything that is happening right now, every employee involved in the creative end of things, we could be looking at a 180-degree shift and change. You just look at the Netflix and when they started making some shifts in their approach to the business in 2018 or so, and how much has changed since then. This could be even bigger.
Here's the thing, though. Even when it gets sold, I don't think McMahon sells it in a way that he still doesn't have control.
Highly possible.
I just don't see. I don't see him giving up control. This is his entire everything. It's more important than his family, than his life, than his health, than his personal life. This is his and the way that he, the reason he still has control is that when he went public, he was smart enough to protect his controlling interest, that no matter what happens, he's still in control of this thing. I don't see him giving that up.
And again, that's where all this intrigue comes from, right? So if you're McMahon and that's really how he is, if let's, say that's true, then you got to think he's going to favor a group like the Saudis to buy, because
either to take it back private or to, because you could also, say Disney buys it with the clause that he still has creative control, something like that. I just don't think.
With the scandal, can you see Disney doing that? I mean, it just makes it so much.
Which is why enter the Saudis, right? Because
so much.
Most of the.
And now enjoy this clip from Encanto 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's who knows.
Who knows? But it's WWFE. It's a messy chaos. That's the whole thing. It's a professional wrestling wedding happening right out here in business,
in the open, in real life.
That cake's going to go in somebody's face.
Yeah, I'll close down with this is so crazy, and why it's important that, whether we have 1 million viewers or we have, a couple hundred each episode, at least, of course, it's on YouTube, which is owned by a huge conglomerate. I was going to say, it's crazy. Even the little shows, your wrestlings, everything is the consolidation into giant mega corporations that has been this science fiction trope for so many years. And we're all like, no, there's too much competition, but it's happening. It's happening in every friggin' slice of the pie in media. And it's, in many ways we benefit as consumers, because when Disney owns everything, we know that the next thing is going to have a lot of money invested in it. So it'll be great.
And let me be clear, Disney, do you want to buy K&M? We are so for sale. You
we will
wouldn't even
Encanto
believe how for sale we are.
We will Encanto the living hell out of this thing for you.
I'll wear Mickey Mouse ears.
Yeah, whatever you need. Disney's like, we will pay you to never say us again, say Disney again.
Say our name again.
We're gonna get the C and D, not the.
The last thing I want to bring up is nothing. I'm going to let this, as always, when my brother Nick's on the show, we're a little overstuffed. I'll drop this in 2 parts this week. Or, whatever. I'll just put the whole 2 hours up. Whatever. Who cares? We appreciate you all. Thanks to our patrons once again. Nick, we're going to have you back, of course. We'll talk more. We'll talk more wrestling. We'll talk more all this stuff. Thanks for being a patrons. Thanks for being viewers. Check out our other shows. We watch Deep Space Nine here on the channel. We play with Keith's Star Trek toys and custom toys on the channel. Do we do anything else? Oh, we play video games. We're playing a point-and-click adventure game and absolutely getting drunk and smashing your head against the wall. It's a lot of fun. You should check it out. Part 3 will drop next week because Keith won't let me drop it because it's too much.
What the 2 hours of this? 2 hours of Deep Space Nine. We already put an hour and a half episode of this up. We still have.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Guys, we're having a lot of fun. Join the team. Patreon.com/K&M. Until then, this has been Keith. Oh, in the interim, keep enjoying the things that you find fun. Don't let anyone yuck your yum, and keep on geeking on. I'll get it one week. Here we go.